Hello, and welcome to Cloud Operator Days Tokyo. My name is Craig McCluckey, and I'm a Vice President of the Modern Application Platform Business Unit, managing the research and development team. And I'm extremely excited to have a chance to talk to you about a topic that I'm very passionate about. And it's Kubernetes and the cloud native journey. By way of introduction, I was one of the founders of the Kubernetes project while I worked at Google, and was also responsible for bootstrapping the Cloud Native Computing Foundation as a place where Kubernetes innovation happens, and a lot of adjacent projects that are already built on Kubernetes are now homed. And the thing that's really interesting to me, and certainly been a big part of my journey, is how enterprise organizations are adopting this technology to solve real-world problems, both in terms of getting access to some new and interesting cloud infrastructure and services, but also as a way to change the way that they operate, really rethink their operating model. And so I'd like to dig into that with you. And the starting point is, I look at Kubernetes as being a bridge to cloud, meaning that as enterprise organizations are looking at their own journey, are looking at being able to access all of this incredibly elastic, flexible computational resource that's now available and can be provisioned through APIs or through a simple console experience, it also represents significant impedance mismatches, challenges to the way they operate. And I think Kubernetes does a nice job of making that infrastructure abstraction more accessible to organizations. And that's really cut across two lines. One line is, how do you actually build an abstraction that you can run the applications that power your business on? But also, what does that mean from an operations perspective as you're living with those applications and evolving them over time? And I'm really going to spend most of my time talking about that second point today, since obviously I think a lot of you are really passionate about the operations side of the house. So the starting point here is, as an enterprise organization is looking at their journey towards the public cloud, there's a recognition that the new infrastructure, the destination where they would want to run those applications, is different to the infrastructure environment where those applications were built in the first place. Meaning it doesn't have exactly the same operating profiles. It doesn't necessarily achieve the same quality of service that those applications were built around. And it certainly isn't necessarily being delivered using the same familiar patterns and practices that enterprise organizations have resulted in, have built themselves around. And so what it really means is that enterprise organizations that are looking to bring applications into cloud often can't simply lift and shift those applications. They really need to prepare the ground for those applications to run. And that is where Kubernetes comes in. It is a capability that not only normalizes your infrastructure environment, but it actually addresses a lot of the gaps that you would have to build yourself if you were embarking on this journey. If you think back to the early days of cloud with companies like Netflix, they really had to change up the way they operated. They had to rethink things like chaos engineering because the cloud didn't necessarily have the same operating environment that they would experience in an on-premises destination. And Kubernetes is really there to solve this problem. It makes it easy to tie together a large amount of resource. And it deals with a lot of the issues that you might encounter as you're starting to move those workloads into cloud. But that's not all it does. It's also an opportunity to rethink how you build your applications, how you operate their applications. And I see most enterprise organizations really looking to do these two things together. They see Kubernetes as this bridge to this new environment, but it also allows opportunities to carry forwards a lot of the work that they've done historically and really look at it as a destination for the modernization of the applications that are running their businesses today. But there's more to it than that. When you think about how IT has evolved over time, we really grew up in a world which was grounded in operator-driven IT, meaning you'd have an operator that would receive a ticket, they would perform a set of actions, and then they would produce an infrastructure environment or a configured application or whatever the case might be that is set up to solve the needs of an organization. Now, Kubernetes is changing that, and it's allowing this move towards intent-driven IT. And what I mean by that is, if you think about what Kubernetes is, at the heart of it, Kubernetes is effectively a database and then a clever set of nested controllers that are able to take an explicit statement of intent and then drive the world into that desired shape. It's obviously most famous for making it easy to deploy Linux application containers and stitch them together into a distributed system. But it's actually a lot more than that. If you're early in your Kubernetes journey, you will tend to think about it as, hey, this is just a nice way to solve the problems associated with building and delivering an application. But as you get further down the journey, there's a tremendous amount of power that's hidden in the system, because it's not only relevant to driving container orchestration, we're also starting to see it as a way to drive the infrastructure abstraction itself. We're seeing organizations start to build much more intelligence in controllers that enable a fundamental shift in the way that IT operates. And this is really going to make a transition from ticket-driven IT to API-driven IT. And not just declarative API-driven IT, like we think of when we think about DevOps, where effectively developers are coding an application into production. It's actually a transition to a declarative API model, which means that your operators are able to start delivering some really powerful services. And where this is going over time is that it enables organizations to start thinking about building your software as a service, whether that's something that's delivered by a platform team to a broad cross-section of developers in an enterprise organization, or increasingly where developers themselves are starting to be able to think about the software that they're delivering as having an as-a-service experience. It's not just about how you architect the application. It's also about how you set up those DevSecOps practices in a way that's relatively low friction and really easy to consume. And so I think about Kubernetes not just as a platform technology. It's a technology that enables organizations to build the platforms that are most relevant to them, to enable a small number of individuals to deliver services to a broader cross-section of individuals within the organization in which they work. And that's a very powerful transition indeed. Now, one of the things that's really interesting, and this is certainly something I've experienced as I've worked with a lot of enterprise organizations that are embracing Kubernetes as a technology, is that it can be a little bit challenging to get going with, meaning for some developers that are experienced in distributed systems and understand a lot of those patterns, it really speaks to them. But for a lot of organizations, it can be a little bit overwhelming. And so one of the really powerful things that I'm seeing emerge in this ecosystem is this idea of layered abstractions, meaning for a lot of developers that don't need to get into the specific details around how an application is crafted, that don't need to tune all of the parameters to get the most out of the application, we have an opportunity to deliver high level of abstractions, meaning you can effectively work to deliver that platform as a service experience that offers a superhighway from the developer's IDE all the way into the production environment. But the thing that's really nice about this is that because we're introducing a modular composable system as that normalized abstraction, when developers do need to get into the details a little bit more, the act of breaking glass, meaning getting access to something that's a little bit lower level, doesn't necessarily invalidate everything that the team has set up. It creates a way to allow access, potentially through approval, to lower levels of the system that unlock productivity and mean that hard things are easy when easy things are easy when you're dealing with these higher level abstractions, but hard things are also possible when you need to drop down to a lower layer in the system. And where this is going over time is that because we now have the system that enables developers to think about their software as a service, it also unlocks productivity at the enterprise organization level because, well, what are those services delivered through? They're delivered through APIs. Those APIs become a unit of collaboration. It enables us to get to a point where we start to stand up an API economy inside an organization, make the work of one team discoverable to another team, making sure that the work of one team is being delivered as a service to another team. And there's this fascinating fusion of technologies that's emerging right now. Seeing Kubernetes, microservices, but increasingly a lot of the federated API gateway technologies becoming a natural part of the stack is going to bring about some very powerful capabilities for the future. And this is an area that I'm personally very passionate about. I'm excited to have an opportunity to continue to work on. Kubernetes is just the start of the journey. It's certainly not the end of the journey. So with that, I'd like to thank you. Obviously, this was a very brief presentation, but just in summary, I look at Kubernetes as being a bridge to cloud. As you're looking at your enterprise applications and thinking about how to get them onto much more intrinsically elastic compute, Kubernetes is a good start. It decouples those applications from the specific environment that you're running in, so that one cloud environment starts to look a lot like another cloud environment. And it's marshalling in a new way to think about operations, moving from ticket-driven IT to API-driven IT, all the way to intent-driven IT, where you're able to start to capture a lot more logic in the underlying abstraction. So please do check out Kubernetes if you're new to the journey. And if you've been working on this journey for a while, really think about what it means, not just as an abstraction to manage container orchestrations, but as a way to rethink that transition from API to intent-driven IT. And do check out the work that we're doing here at VMware Tanzu. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, I'm available on Twitter. Thank you so much for your time.